A recipe calls for 2 teaspoons of salt, 4 teaspoons of pepper, and 3 teaspoons of garlic powder. How much pepper and garlic powder would you need for a larger batch if you are using 15 teaspoons of salt? To solve this problem, we want to think ratios or proportions. Because we have a recipe and the salt, the pepper, and the garlic powder all kind of go in the same relationship, whether we have a small recipe or a big recipe that we're making, meaning if we're building a small batch or a larger batch. So thinking ratios and thinking proportions, let's start by setting something up. Namely, let's first take our salts. So a recipe calls for 2 teaspoons of salt, so I have 2 teaspoons of salt. And that corresponds in the same relationship to 4 teaspoons of pepper. So we would say that 2 teaspoons of salt are to 4 teaspoons of pepper as, or in a similar fashion, to 15 teaspoons of salt corresponding to X teaspoons of pepper. We have relationships and proportionality going on. We're comparing salt to salt and pepper to pepper. How do we solve a proportion? Well, we cross multiply and we divide. So I'm going to take and ignore my units, and I'm going to put 2 over 4 equals 15 over X. We cross multiply, and that gives us that we have 2 times X equals 4 times 15, or more simply 2X equals 60. The last step is we divide both sides by 2. And so that tells us that we have X equals 30. And what was that representing? X was representing the amount of pepper in the larger batch recipe corresponding to the 15 teaspoons of salt. So X is 30 teaspoons of pepper. We can repeat this idea of a proportion and set up for the second guy, which involves garlic powder. Namely, in our recipe, 2 teaspoons of salt corresponds to 3 teaspoons of garlic powder. In the same fashion as 15 teaspoons of salt corresponds to X teaspoons of garlic powder. In both instances, we're talking about a ratio or a relationship. 2 teaspoons salt compares to 3 teaspoons garlic in the same way that 50 teaspoons salt corresponds to X teaspoons of garlic. We continue to solve, so we have 2 over 3 equals 5 over X, or 2 is to 3 as 15 is to X. We cross multiply and divide. So I have 2 times X equals 3 times 15, or better yet, 2X equals 45. And then I divide both sides. Divide the left by 2, divide the right by 2. Those 2's on the left cancel, leaves me with X equals, and this time we're left with a fraction, 45 halves. Or, if we like, that's 22.5. 22 and a half. And in this example, or this proportion, X was representing our garlic powder. And so that is 22 and a half teaspoons of garlic powder. And that's it.